From Koenigstein Road in the east to Casitas Gap in the west, an orange curtain has descended across the Ojai Valley. This is Ojai Talk of the Town. Hey everyone, Brett Bradigan, editor of the Ojai Quarterly and Ojai Monthly, Ojai's magazines, with an exciting guest this time, actually a returning champion, Jim Bailey, director of Rock Tree Sky, going to talk about an exciting new program at the national level where he's been intimately involved, which he's hoping to bring to Ojai, which in fact that kind of student-based learning he's been doing for decades. Jim is everybody's favorite teacher who's gone through our local school systems here, and with this conversation you'll understand why. Please enjoy. Hey Jim.
Hey Brett.
Great to see you.
Really good to see you.
Yeah, one of the reasons I do this podcast is I can have my buddies on so we can shoot the breeze.
Yeah.
But we actually have stuff to talk about this time.
That's true. There is a lot to talk about.
So let's jump right into it.
Okay.
So what's the new program here? This educational ecosystems.
Absolutely. That is a good question. That's what we've been discovering together with a group of people all around the country. Through I guess luck and preparedness, Rock Tree Sky was invited to join a national cohort of like-minded educators, both at a practitioner level, kind of what we do, managing a learning site, as well as people from state boards of education, higher ed.
Well, how did the selection process go? How did you get picked?
We had taken our young people. We had taken several of our learners to a youth leadership conference in D.C. offered by an organization called Education Reimagined, and they had become really smitten with one of them in terms of what they had to say about being in a learner-centered site. And how one of our students,
awesome.
They spoke so well about their experience, and they said, "Hey, we've got this cohort that's going to be forming over the next year, and we're trying to move the needle on some systems change and mindset shifting, and we always like to hear from the students, from the learners themselves." There's a saying that some young people in this movement used, that is, not about us, without us. So if you're going to make some educational change or talk about it, we should really have the young people there, right?
Not about us, without us.
Yeah, that's from my friends.
Motto.
Those are from my friends at Bridge Makers out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. A fantastic group of young people working with other high schoolers, trying to helping them advocate for being involved in the conversation about decisions that directly affect young people's lives. So they invited one of our young people to be on this call with K through 12, educational funders, nonprofit sector, other practitioners, and they said, "Jim, if you'd like to join to support this student, please feel free to join."
One particular student.
Yeah, to join the student on the call, and
this wasn't.
This was just a phone. This was a call, like a Zoom call.
Yeah,
they were
introductions.
That's right, and of course, this student did it again. They spoke eloquently, powerfully, accurately about what it means to them to be able to have choice and voice in their learning. And this is a young person who's 12 years old. Wow. And it was moving. And then at the end, they graciously thanked everybody and the adults for spending time trying to support young people to shift the education system. So it was amazing.
So you must have had some reflected glory on that, because that's your student, right? So
absolutely.
They must have just been shirt buttons popping off kind of pride.
That's right.
Huh?
That's right. They've been at Rock Tree Sky, I think, 4 years. Hadn't done anything that looks like conventional schooling. And so after the call, I found myself really excited by the work that I was hearing that they were leaning into. And so I sent an email. I sent a query email to the director of the organization. I said, "Hey, if you ever feel like my voice and Rock Tree Sky would be beneficial in this conversation. This is the work that we are interested in doing, and we have time and energy to put into it, and keep us in mind. And she sent an email back, said, matter of fact, we did have somebody drop out that is at a practitioner level, and would you be able to commit to 3 trips to DC over the next year, and some other trips around the country to meet with this cohort and help us surface the best thinking about what the future of a learner-centered model of education could be, as an offering, not to replace the current system, but to be an additional avenue for families to choose in their communities. Nobody's trying to utterly and fully replace the conventional model, because what we know is that doesn't match with everybody's values, and they will, some people really like the kind of conventional education that they're getting for their young person, and it works for some young people. But you and I know, I think anybody listening knows, they can think of somebody who the conventional legacy school did not work for their friends or people they know.
I consider myself in that cohort. Yes.
Yeah. I think I might have done well. And I, to be honest, when I think back on my education, I think about times in elementary school where I spent massive amount of time outside of the classroom and wasn't, under, say, the thumb of the teacher all the time. I had this special job they gave me at my campus where I ran the movie projector for teachers who couldn't do that.
Grade?
Well, I was in 4th grade. In 4th grade, I was running the projector because, some of the nice older teachers hadn't figured that one out yet. And so there were many times where I was not in the class. I did fine. I missed out on a ton of things, but still I was able to thrive because, learning is happening everywhere all the time for young people. They want to be successful members of their community, and it doesn't have to happen in a classroom on a timeline dictated by adults. In fact, that model that was developed during the Industrial Revolution was a model based on efficiency. It was based on ranking and sorting young people and deciding where they were going to go. 30% are going to be managers, 30% are going to work the machines in the factories, and 30% are going to be laborers. Right. And while many of my colleagues, probably don't abide by that idea about the way that they teach or the way that they are as teachers, the system itself has not changed. And if the system hasn't changed, it still kind of guides and controls how we do the work with young people. And that's something, I butted up against a lot when I was a teacher at Matilaha. Sure, I had a certain way that I wanted to be with young people and to teach and follow curiosities and interests and novelties that might not have been in line with the curriculum or the textbook or the timeline for the test. And it made it difficult at times,
Yeah. Well, how about your star student? Were they also involved in the process, or that was just kind of your introduction?
That was the introduction. They want a different student from that cohort that we took to DC as part of that youth leadership conference was invited back this year to be one of the youth leaders.
Unknown caller.
So, that star student was not invited to the rest of those cohort meetings, but there were young people in the room for those meetings to help surface our best thinking. But, Brett, there were, they had the ex-commissioner of education for New Hampshire there and participating. We had a man, Scott Bess, who started a Purdue Polytechnic high school to help get some more diversity into Purdue University, and he's now on the State Board of Education in Indiana. He's part of the process. So it's not just a bunch of people with schools with names like Rock Tree Sky.
Yeah.
This is a big movement.
Educational luminaries.
Yes.
So what was how did it work? Like where did you get together? What kind of settings? How many people? What was the programming like?
Yeah, good question. We had a couple meetings in DC. Education Reimagining is an organization that spun out of a meeting. There's a group called Convergence that brings together different stakeholders on different topics that are worth examining within our civic life. And 10 years ago, they brought together a group of people around education and asked them, hey, if we were to design or redesign our education system, what would we do now? And they brought these different stakeholders, students, teachers, parents, higher ed, out of school time intermediaries like Boys and Girls Club. And they really took a look at, what do we believe about young people? Do we believe that they need to be, in these systems that are, designed, for kind of compliance and following a timeline and giving, putting buckets of information into their head? Or do we believe that young people are, curious, powerful, deserve autonomy? So they came out of this meeting and this convergence meeting. They came out with a lot of with some basic, 5 basic concepts. This is how Education Reimagined got formed, and that is, they said, if we are going to make education work for the many, for all students, for all learners, not just some. We need to bring in more student agency. We need to bring in
not
more...
Not about us without us.
That's right. They need voice and agency. This all comes out of self-determination theory as well, which is a well-studied and validated...
This goes back to like Maria Montessori.
She's a cousin. I would say Maria Montessori is, part of the family of this educational model.
And our own Monica Ross as well.
That's right.
I don't think she gets enough credit for her advances in education. I think it's mostly because I know some of her early students, and I think that's why they get a bad rap. But that was just a couple of bad eggs.
That sounds like another...
I'm just teasing.
I want to hear that story, maybe.
Off mic, you will.
Off mic, yeah. So Ed Reimagined spun out of that meeting, and some of the people who were in that initial gathering, one woman, Kelly Young, who had been at the time the director of Family and Children's Services for the D.C. public school system.
Oh, yeah.
And a group of others spun off and created a separate nonprofit to help catalyze change and support practitioners who are already working in a more learner-centered way. Mm-hmm. And then post-COVID,
we got to talk about COVID.
Yeah,
sure, we'll stick a pin in that. But okay, so post-COVID.
So I'll wrap this up. Post-COVID, they realized that kids were actually still learning families were being really inventive and finding places and ways in the community for their young people to continue to thrive and learn, whether it be some online access through programs like OutSchool, whether it be these pods in people's backyards, any number of things.
Lots of living experiments.
Yes, lots of experiments going on. And what they found is kids continued to thrive. There were some socialization issues that young people needed to spend more time with each other, but kids continued to thrive. They may not have learned the things that the school system or the standardized pieces are expecting,
will reflect. Yeah.
But they were doing well. And so out of it, they said, if we were to totally reimagine how we can educate a young person in our communities, would we create this building, like this one building with 4 walls and just warehouse all the kids in there and separate them out?
Yeah, the factory system.
Yeah, and they said, no, I don't think we would. So the invitation is to imagine our entire community as an ecosystem where learning is happening.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I think that's key to a lot of the concepts that intrigue me. I'm a big fan of a pattern language.
I love a pattern language.
Yeah,
that's a great
you
book.
look at that, and one of the things that struck me, and I talk about this quite a bit.
There it is.
Yeah, is I need to get a bunch of them because I want to start handing it out to people.
Yeah.
But the perfect size of a community for all these different ecosystems to interact with each other and bump up against each other is 7,500. Which, does that sound familiar?
Sounds pretty close to a number right here.
It sure does, yeah.
So as a result of being in this cohort, Brett, we were invited, Rock Tree Sky was invited to help think about and surface our best thinking on how we could create these ecosystems of learning and what. Yeah,
because you can look at yourself as having been in the trenches even long before the pandemic. I imagine you've been walking the walk.
Absolutely. And there are things we were doing to create a learning ecosystem, things our families were doing already. And so right now it's just naming some of those things. And then the big work, Brett, is to make it equitably accessible. Right? Some families really go about the work of getting what they need for their kids, and they have the resources and the assets to do that, or the social capital to do that. Other families, less so. So one of the things we're working on is how do we create a model and fund it so that any family who wants to allow their young person to follow their own unique relevant, meaningful learning journey.
Their curiosities.
Absolutely. I read a book a few years ago called The Hungry Mind, and it's curiosity research. And I discovered from the book that curiosity thrives on two things primarily. One is novelty. Yeah. You can understand that. And the other is freedom. Maybe, our best classes have some novelty. Freedom is not something I would describe in the system of education that I was a part of.
It's just the opposite. Yeah, they're trying to get everybody winning through the widget factory.
You can look. There was recently some research done on how many times in a day a young person in school was required to be compliant or follow a directive in comparison with an incarcerated individual in the U.S. prison system, and they found that young people in school get far more requests for compliance and following somebody else's requirements and demands much more than somebody incarcerated in the prison
we wonder
system.
Why some schools are just, the bush leagues for, the penal system. And it's like it's scary.
Yeah.
Especially some of these underfunded, under-resourced neighborhoods where it's just like a rite of passage to go into the prison system.
Well, the school is not providing the young people in those communities with anything that is meaningful for their lives. It's something that's been decided to be meaningful elsewhere. And if you're going to go, we've seen it right here in Ojai. If you're going to go into higher education, then school might be, I'm still going to say might be, providing something, the conventional model, providing something that you might need. That's starting to shift as well. However, for many young people in their communities, reading Emily Dickinson or analyzing an essay is not something that is meaningful to the context of their lived experience.
Exactly.
So how do we get them powerfully in their community so that they can make a difference in their community and that they can be seen and known in their community, instead of warehousing them away? My kids will be in our community. I know plenty of people. I have a social capital, but if there's somebody in the Ojai community whose young person, whose child does not have access to many other people, they're not going to have the same, no matter how well they do in school, they might not have the same opportunity because...
And the networking, yes, we know that's exactly how...
What you know and who you know.
Yeah, I think it's more important who you know than just about anything else.
Yeah.
These connections that get you into these, higher education centers and, Harvard and Princeton and on. Like it all goes back to connections.
Or even working, even if you're not going to go to our higher ed, working in your community. I'm really careful about, university was great for me, but if you look at how much debt some young people are getting saddled with.
It's crippling.
It is crippling. So I just paid mine off finally a year ago. Finally was done. I had a long deferment because of, some other payments from my unfortunate separation and child support up until the time Emma Bailey came to live with me here in Ojai. Yeah. But, Yeah.
Where is Emma? She's still at Bart's Books.
She's at Bart's. She's doing
what a
all
great
of their
place for her,
programming.
yeah. She told me about the state laureate coming, which she felt she's just really proud about that. The
Absolutely.
state poet laureate coming
That's right.
to Ojai to do a reading.
What a learning hub is Bart's Books. Mm-hmm. That would be something in the community we'd say that's a learning hub or a field site where a young person could go and learn a ton of things. And then the next step, Brett, that we're trying to do is credit that learning. See, that's a
complicated issue, I bet.
Well, it is, because the current law of the land is based on credentialing and learning only on the Carnegie unit, right? Andrew Carnegie said back in the early 1900s, I will fund your retirement system for K through 16 education, but I want it to be founded upon a certain number of hours that a young person is in class to get a unit of credit. It's based on, I think, what is it now? It's like 181 seat hours equals 1 unit of credit if you get a D, 2 units of credit if you get the C.
I did not know that.
The Carnegie unit, but the Carnegie Foundation, through research and taking a look at the landscape, is actively right now in this moment working to undo the Carnegie unit. They are admitting that was a mistake, and they're saying, we need a system that allows young people to progress and move through their education and their learning based on demonstrations of competency. For a young person, some young people, it might take 6 months to demonstrate competency in a subject. For others, it might take a full year. Some might take 3 months. I myself remember that slow, painful drip of sitting in class for hours, something I already knew how to do, and watching my life tick by, looking out the window.
Oh my God, it was horrible. I failed kindergarten 3 years in a row. And they finally gave me a social promotion, but I couldn't figure out how to use scissors until they figured out, oh, you're left-handed. Let's try this other patch. So I put that on them, not me.
That's right. You had your own. They should have just let you learn scissors when
I was ready to learn
when you were
scissors.
able to learn scissors and ready. So Carnegie is moving away from this right now and working with folks like Education Reimagined and other organizations to.
So are they the main funder of this programs?
Carnegie is one of the large funders. There's another organization called Stand Together Trust that is funding learner-centered or self-directed spaces, Vela Fund. So there's a lot of different folks coming into this.
Yeah. Well, the one thing interesting about Andrew Carnegie was how he divided up. He said you divide your life up into 3 parts. The first part, you learn everything you can learn. The second phase of your life, you earn all that you can earn. You go out there and make money. And then the third part, you take your learning and your money and you give back. You put those resources, both intellectual and material, back into the world. He was a complicated figure, the Homestead strike, and he busted some heads and broke up unions, and he had his issues. But I think towards the end of his life, he realized that this accumulation of resources did him no good unless he could leave a legacy.
That's right.
And here we are still talking about him 120 years later.
I guess it worked in some ways. One thing I would if I could sit down with Andrew Carnegie right now, I would ask that last phase of giving back and being a part. I would ask if some of that can be brought back into that first phase, because what I've seen is that young people do want to be
of service.
They want to be of service. They want. Absolutely. That's what we see with teens. I think what I hear from teens, one of the greatest frustrations is that they're not allowed to do meaningful work and actually do things to either help move the needle on larger issues like awareness of climate change or even small local issues. But they do work that feels to them just kind of I don't know if ancillary is the right word. It's kind of hypothetical. That's the way one teen described it recently. They said, we're doing this hypothetical work, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and help out in my community or do something real and meaningful.
And get credit for it, too. I don't see why spending half a day doing trail rebuilding or or wild plant restoration on the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy wouldn't be perfect for these kids.
I can't wait to sit down.
It's like a non-classroom and yet learning environment with rich context and social aspects to it. I just think that what I'm getting out of what you're telling me is there's learning opportunities everywhere.
That's right. I can't wait to sit down with the crew, the people who run that.
The Concerned Resource Environmental Workers, great organization.
So much good stuff happening in this valley. So it's a natural fit for what we're working on creating. And then, yes, the teacher's role is to then look at those experiences, work with the young person to pull out reflection, demonstrations of competency that have been gained in the field, and credit that time. We have this very narrow window in the conventional state standard model that we say this is the creditable learning, but there's a whole sea of information out there that we have decided is not necessary. And some of that hasn't been updated, and you've got some teachers are like hoarders, with standards. We just keep adding more. We don't take some away. Yeah. There's this guy I like, Gary Stager. He was a student of Seymour Papert, who came out of the MIT Media Lab, who did a lot of work on constructionism in education and building things and to create learning models. Very hands-on. For me in my world, that's somebody I've been drawn to. But Gary Stager said you could get rid of half the standards tomorrow, and it doesn't matter which half, and the education would improve for young people in the conventional system.
Just because it raises the cap, huh?
Well, there's so much, it's definitely...
Teaching to the test is
deeper.
Not very
we're interested in deeper learning, Brett. I ask my young people, previous students when I see them. I saw a previous student at Ojai Day came up, thanked me. I enjoyed your class. Oh, Mr. Bailey, how are you doing? You look the same. Oh, thank you. You do too. I asked, do you remember anything from our 8th grade science class? Was there anything that still in your memory now at the age of 30 or 35?
God damn, you've been around a while.
And, occasionally somebody says, I remember the bed of nails. I remember that bowling ball we had from the ceiling. Mostly I just remember that I liked coming to class. I felt like you cared about us. I felt like you tried to understand us. And there's something essential about those pieces. When I made the mistake, I think, of thinking that my call it success, if you will, as a teacher in Ojai was related to some particular pedagogy and then some way that I was delivering my lessons. But as I talk to more students and as I reflect on what my experience was like, it was really that primarily I tried to know every student. I tried to make sure that they felt loved, valued, seen, which gets back to the fact that learning is relational. Right, we're social animals, designed by evolution to be, in community, and relatedness is an essential piece of the human motivation and desire to learn.
Beautifully
Unknown
put.
caller.
Yeah, popular, Brett.
I'm just gotta take a time mark there, 27:39. So. We're talking about the pattern language. There's lots of examples of that in there. In the community settings, they talk about the businesses should have eyes on the street, big windows, like the cobblers, their shoes. Because the kids getting out of school are just going to be pressing their noses up against the window. And the amount of learning that goes on in those situations in these small towns with people and the groups and the interactions is really key to just everything. It's not necessarily strictly related to this, but I'm sure you hear it all the time. These kids cannot wait to get out of here. And then they get out in the world and they have kids. They cannot wait to get back.
Oh, Ojai, you're saying? Yeah. Yes. Well, I wonder if that'd be a little different if they were invited to be more, if they were more integrated into the community of Ojai, if there was some stronger connective tissue.
So they didn't have to leave in the first place.
Maybe, certainly organizations like the Ojai Valley Youth Foundation have been great at helping young people be connected to this community. But yeah, I'm always happy when a young person gets to leave Ojai for a little bit and see some other places.
Of the individuation process. Who they are,
and then they come back and they can appreciate this really lovely community that we're lucky to live in. I'm glad you keep coming back to pattern language. I came across that book out of a book I read on the design, called The Design of Childhood, where an architect took a look at the design factors that we put in a child's life, from toys, schools, homes, and cities.
Brilliant.
Right? And looked at, and then her question was, how can we design these spaces so that children can go about being, following their, how does she put it? I think it was, how do we create these spaces so that young people can, become the individuals that they are designed to become, so they can go about the work of learning, growing, connecting to community, and how that affects their experience of learning. And there was a big section on school design. And
very important.
And so when I read that, and then I picked up a pattern language from Bart's books. Nice. Emma helped me, or Matt, yeah. And when I looked at it, there were many things in there that I could take and put into place when we were building out the space at Rock Tree Sky.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Rock Tree Sky. How did this concept come about? You were in the public school system, then you weren't. Like, how did you get this idea? How did you get it funded? How did you get all that going?
Yeah. My wife and I left the school we were at to work in a way that felt more aligned with how we saw young people, that we saw them inherently wanting to learn and be successful members of their community on a timeline, and interested in topics that were perhaps unique to each one, that they maybe needed more time outside, and that we didn't need.
So it was a very thoughtful, deliberative process. You were
absolutely
this 35,000-foot view of how this could work.
Yeah, my process is that I'm going to really think through it. If the first time I came across some of the foundational assumptions that inspired the creation of Rock Tree Sky, and Natasha and I leaving to create it. At first, I was deeply questioning of them, because they were so out of the norm of what I viewed education as being. I think this happens for all of us. Schools are, the idea of school is ubiquitous in our culture. It's in the movies we see, and it's really just this one single version with subtle variations. So that's the world we live in. And so that's the messaging we get. So at first, the idea that kids wanted to learn, that they wanted to, that I didn't have to have carrots and sticks and stickers and grades. The idea of no grades, and kids would still want to learn. Good teachers can create those spaces, and really it's about space creation. So we left. I thought deeply about it.
What year was this?
This was the winter of 2015, fall of 2015, we started thinking about it. And then it started to become, a little more seriously thought about in the spring of 2016. And initially it was just going to be that Natasha was going to leave and, be with a small homeschooling group of some friends and families who were like-minded in their view of young people. And when I thought about how much fun that would be to create a space, a learning space, and design that from the ground up, based on what I'd learned in my 15 years in the classroom, it just sounded too exciting, and I didn't want to miss out. So, we both quit our jobs. And
were you at Oak Grove at that time?
I was at Oak Grove, which is a lovely school, an amazing school.
It is really. Beautiful campus and buildings, structures, the people. It's just a really sweet place.
Yeah. If I was going to send my young person to school, I'd send him to Oak Grove.
Yeah.
But this is a demonstration of something that's not school. It's a learning space. It's an invitation. It's curating and putting up provocations and novelties to create opportunity for young people to investigate things that they're interested in, or
light a spark.
Yeah, that's right. So our job is to set that spark and then ask curious questions to deepen that exploration. Was there a model for you to make this happen? Or you just had to take little bits and pieces here? Was it like it was probably the bits and pieces approach. When we first started, I maybe knew about two models, two spaces. One was a Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts.
That, yeah.
I probably mentioned that before. It's been deeply studied by Dr. Peter Gray out of Boston University, who's an evolutionary psychologist, who wrote the college textbook on psychology, which you've probably used in any college class you've been in, introductory psychology course.
College classes.
Yeah, and we knew about Summerhill.
That.
Yeah, we knew about Summerhill in England. Those are the two, kind of democratic free schools, and we're not necessarily a democratic free school. We are probably more of a representative democracy. And, we do have some agreements that we abide by. There are structures that support meaningful choice
Mainly
making.
probably not to interfere with the other kids when they're busy doing their things.
Take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of the space. Those are kind of the three primary agreements that everything can move back to.
That sounds like a pretty comprehensive list. I think you probably figure any infraction is going to involve one or more of those three points. Yeah,
that's correct.
So I was, burnout for teachers. Is that, I'm just trying to figure out how bad it was. Did it get worse during the pandemic? Is it getting back to normal? Is it just a chronic condition of the modern educational system?
I think it's a chronic condition. I think there's, look, the education system is an evolutionary mismatch to how we as, primates have learned to be successful in the world over time. And you put a teacher who comes into education for all the right reasons, to help carry on civilization, to support inspiration in young people, to wrestle with the big ideas of life and the world. And then when young people, curious, bright, naturally interested young people come through their doors with their own ideas and inspirations, and that teacher has to say time and time again, well, that's very interesting, but today we can't do that. We have to do this because this is where we're at, and we have a test coming.
Get to this point.
I've got to get there by the end of May because the school's ranking depends on it, and all the parents are going to go to that dashboard and they're going to look at the ranking and think that means everything. I've seen it happen here in Ojai.
Yeah.
I've seen Ojai, OUSD, kind of run through the coals at certain schools because of these dashboard rankings that aren't a true indication of whether young people are going to thrive in their life. So I think teachers burn out because I used to say to my kids, if I wanted to be a cop, I would have been a cop. I don't want to be in this compliance game. I want to support learning and create a fascinating, engaging environment for young people to go about the work of learning. Because that is the work of young people. Is the work of the learner. Instead, we have a system where the teacher is doing education to and for young people. Mm-hmm. Instead of the young person.
Not with the young people.
Yeah. So that, I think the burnout continues to happen for folks. If you can carve out your own, your own way of surviving in it, I think you could be in there for the long haul. I was always deeply afraid of that, Brett. I saw it
getting sucked into the system.
Well, no, getting into that burnout phase. I definitely had teachers who came to me towards the end of their career and would put the physics toys that I was making with young people that were teaching profound concepts in physics and getting them deeply engaged, and they could describe what was going on, and they would come to me with these and plop them down on my desk in my room and say, how many more of these are there going to be? Because, that's really distracting and the kids are walking around campus. And I thought, I just came out of Cal Poly. This is what there's, learn by doing. This is the stuff that was meaningful to me. So I could tell that there wasn't the joy that they had because, they had been put into a system that just is an evolutionary mismatch for the animal that we are.
Instead of igniting their curiosity, they were managing, like babysitting and policing.
Yeah, and teachers go into it for the right reasons. Every single one of my colleagues goes into it for the right reasons, that they're doing the best they can. But again, if the system is the problem, that they're shoehorned into, then we need to create an additional system. If the system we have doesn't work for every single young person in our community, then we are not done inventing that system. We have to add something else.
Yeah, it's got to be a living, breathing pedagogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got to keep it moving.
Yeah.
So back to Rock Tree Sky.
Yeah.
So what, finding the facility, that kind of fell into your lap, right, with Summit School. And I know the parents up there were deeply wounded by losing that community center, which a school is a community center.
Absolutely. Understandably so. So. It was, we had been renting space adjacent to the Stagecoach Market, working with the county on a CUP as an arts and crafts educational space, which it was zoned to be able to fit into. And then Summit closed. And one of my neighbors said, Jim, you're going to take that space over. And I jokingly said to her, I taught her child, worked with her child when I was actually a teacher at Summit as a science specialist.
I didn't know you worked at Summit.
4 years, one day a week as a traveling elementary science specialist. And I said, Tony, don't you wish that evil on me? That's going to be a lot of work. There's a lot of heartache here. There's, going to be a lot of trust building with my community.
The school declining enrollments got to a point where it was just not sustainable. And the parents really bonded and organized about keeping that school open, probably much longer than it would have in the normal course of events. True. Committed to having close by education for what they felt was their very distinct community.
Absolutely. And Summit, of all places for us to move into, Summit has its own unique history as being kind of a renegade kind of small school space where kids
Maverick.
They got to do some amazing stuff. I would say that maybe of the public schools, elementary schools in the OUSD space, that school probably was already in many ways aligned with some of the things that we might believe, getting kids up the trail, up into nature. Mr. Schofield taking young people on nature walks and describing the plants and the creatures in the river.
Caesar Canyon, beautiful. Yeah. Yep. That's used to be one of my little secret trout fishing spots, of which surprisingly there are several in Ojai, which doesn't seem like it would be. I don't know if it survived between the Thomas Fire and mudslides and the drought, whether they're still actually. I haven't been up there with a fishing rod in 10 years or more. What can you tell me?
I've not seen any trout in there, but I don't know that I've gotten to your secret spots. We do go take a dip in the creek, at least.
So there's still enough. Now there's
plenty of water.
Absolutely, I'm sure there's plenty of water.
Yeah, it's the swimming holes are still there, if you know where to look, and if you do, don't put them on social media, please. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it was Dennis Shives or somebody told me that as soon as they get popular, they get tagged.
Yeah, I've not seen any tagging up there for a while, thank goodness. But Santa Paula Canyon certainly.
Well, back to Rock Tree Sky, and getting that off the ground, and the funding, and how did you manage? Starting up a school from nothing is a big deal.
Initially primarily we were funded by parents' fees. I did the math on the back of the envelope and said, okay, if we charge this much and we're still kind of the best value perhaps in the community, we can make it work. And so it was initially parents' fees, and then we quickly discovered from some families that in California, the independent study laws in the Ed Code allow independent study schools to pay for enrichment services for their learners. And there were several of these independent study charter schools that had formed in recent times that were allowing funding to go to the families the families to choose where that funding would go to for approved educational vendors, of which we quickly became one. And so families were able to use those educational funds. I believe.
Yeah, we don't want to get into the voucher debate.
Yeah, right. This was
very complicated, but I think in this case it's a supplemental.
It's considered supplemental enrichment services because they're saving money. They're not running a brick and mortar space, right? So for us that increases the equitable access. We appreciated that. So that's how it initially started, and it grew from maybe 17 kids when we opened our doors to 40 by the end of that year, and at the start of the next year maybe it was 55, and towards the end it was busting at the seams at 65. And then
is that your capacity, you feel, 65?
No.
Are you having to turn people away?
On some days at this point, yes. Yeah. There are a few days that are still open. No, our current enrollment, Brett, is 215 is what I meant to say.
Wow.
215 students that come anywhere from 2 to 3 days a week, generally.
From other parts of the district, or even like
they come from within Ojai Unified.
Homeschoolers as well.
Yeah, within Ojai Unified, outside of Ojai Unified. I have a family that drives 2 days a week from Acton. I have families that come from Thousand Oaks, Camarillo.
Where do they find you?
I do ask that question. I think they search online. Also, they know other people who are wanting to educate their children with more freedom and choice and agency. And parents are the best. Parents care so much about their young people, and they talk to other parents a lot. So most of the time, families hear about us through other families that they know.
I'm sure that network is probably pretty strong.
Yeah. And it's not just the homeschooling families anymore. There's people who are just doing school differently. Mm-hmm. I consider it almost like a new schooling. There's these hybrid models that are popping up, and people are realizing that for their young person to thrive, be successful and happy, they need a variety of things. And 5 days a week in a conventional school is not working.
Not one size fits all.
Yeah. So
interesting. So what is the goal? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? Not just with this program that we started talking about, which we need to get back to as well, but you and Natasha and your vision and partnerships with homeschooling families and the Ojai Unified School District and the whole spectrum of.
Well, I think the next, it's a really good question. One of the goals is to make sure that any family who wants this type of education for their child can get it, and can get it publicly funded at some point. That's kind of the work that Carnegie Camp Foundation is committed to at the moment, working with Education Reimagined to have 5 demonstration sites in 5 diverse communities for 5 years and collect the data, work out the challenges of shared services, and then work on the policy lever to create policy allowances and public funding for these types of educational ecosystems to be available in any region.
Yeah, to scale up.
That's the challenge. There's currently, we're in the middle of applying there's a request for a proposal with Stand Together Trust right now, applying for, pipeline and capacity building, because this is a different way of working with young people, and it requires a rethinking of how we as adults work in the space with young people and create the space for young people. So, that's a problem. We could say, let's have a bunch of, Rock Tree Sky style spaces or these community-based ecosystems, but the teachers coming out of the teacher colleges aren't currently prepared to step into those roles yet. higher ed is involved in this, and I would say right now leading the way is the Arizona State University Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. They are strongly pivoting towards bringing learner-centered awareness into their education program. And they're a national leader in that work. There are some other universities that are leaning into this as well.
Yeah. Well, there was that British lady back in the 40s, 50s, 60s with the, free-range schooling. Do you remember where the kids would play in junkyards and make up their
absolutely
broken glass and rusty tin and all the whole 9 yards. And the kids were just in a context environment of imagination and building things, and it was just the opposite of like a helicopter safe space kind of approach.
Absolutely. There's
a name for that. It isn't free range kids, but
maybe loose parts theory is part of it. There's the whole junkyard playground that did come out of England post World War II, these bombed out lots, and the kids inventing their own games.
Yeah, I think it was that was a kid built up, started with the kids, because why are they spending so much time in these places that just seem so dangerous?
You have to watch them, though. One of the things I would say to a parent or anybody listening is, the next time your young person is doing something like playing or goofing around, it's good to step back and watch a little bit and see what they're doing. I've seen, over the years, young people at Rock Tree Sky invent their own games.
Yeah.
And they create this complex set of rules. They communicate about the rules. If somebody's not playing, they, make some requests of that young person, or they're not invited to play, or they make a compromise on the rules. But they create games of their own invention without any adult supervision. And there's a whole field of study that's called playwork. Where you look.
That's interesting. Because if you look at what kids are doing, they're basically like working.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
They're hammering, and they're prying, and they're gluing, and they're taping, and it's all like some kind of, digging. They're all doing forms of labor. Yeah,
it's meaningful. It's at their level, and it's meaningful to them. It may not be meaningful to us. We have this lens, this adult lens that we put down on kids, but play is truly the work of children. It's how mammals have learned to practice skills, whether they be social, interrelatedness skills, or physical skills, or thinking skills, or communication skills. All of these ways of being that we have are designed to help us learn how to be successful in our environment. And I think we as adults, we kind of we jump the gun, we jump in with our assumptions about what they need to do and when, and we don't realize that there is so much work, as you say, going on with their play. 100%.
It's like skills.
Yeah, Simon Nicholson. It's worth taking a look at if anybody finds what Brett and I are talking about interesting. Simon Nicholson. He has a paper that he put out in 1971. He was an architect, and it's called Loose Parts Theory. And
I think that's very close to what I was talking about.
Yeah, and he says his ultimate premise is the opportunity for discovery, learning, etc., is directly relatable to the amount and variety of loose parts in a person's environment. And he would look at a regular playground or a play structure that's on a school campus, and he said, you've already robbed the child of 2/3 of the learning and fun when you've put in a play structure. Because one, were they involved in designing it and thinking of it? No, you took that away from them. Were they involved in the building and construction of it? You robbed them of that experience. Now they get to play on it. Okay, 1 out of 3, I guess, isn't bad.
Better than nothing.
But put out a bunch of loose parts. So, purposefully at Rock Tree Sky, we have a couple of loose parts zones where,
also known as junkyards.
That is it,
No, I'm just kidding.
You've got to put some visual screening, because it can be jarring to the adult eye. A child sees a palette of opportunity, and we as adults say, what is that mess?
What is that junk?
Yeah.
So what, back to Rock Tree Sky,
Yeah.
what is the relationship with Ojai Unified School District, and how is that, how are you looking to shape that for the future?
Yeah.
Because public schools, this is a crisis moment, I think, especially after COVID. And I do want to talk a little bit, then I'll let you go, but
Yeah.
I do want to talk about locally here in Ojai and generally about what happened during COVID to learning and
Yeah.
how did they get behind and how do they catch up, and what were maybe some good points to that about being on their own more.
We've been through it here in Ojai, haven't we, Brett, recently?
Yeah.
I never have seen anything like what we just witnessed in the last 2 years.
Pretty much every school board meeting from 2000 to 2009,
Mm-hmm.
and none of these discussions are new.
Right.
I mean, we knew, like when I got here, was peak enrollment like 4,200.
Yes.
And now it's less than half of that.
That's right.
And it was going down, and everybody's thinking, we got all this excess capacity with real estate. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?
It's hard for a school board to close a neighborhood school. It's nobody wanted to do it, and we didn't do it until we got in trouble. And and then this last year we ripped the Band-Aid off, and that really hurt. I was sad to see the kind of communication that was happening between various folks in the community about the whole issue, and
none of it was very constructive or helpful.
It was not constructive, and it came out of fear and pain about our greatest issue of concern, our children. So it's understandable. Our partnership with OUSD was developed with the idea that instead of this state funding coming to these charter school entities that are doing these independent study schools, why don't we bring that money into Ojai, hire some local teachers for an independent study program, and just work with this in-house? And so, we worked with Ojai Unified to create an independent study school that now is the fastest growing school in the Valley, that started with maybe 35 young people and now has 175, maybe 185 right now, Summit School.
That's awesome.
So, the state funding comes in. There are local teachers that are supported. I think Summit School now has 6 teachers that work with families. And the relationship is that Rock Tree Sky, which I think, we had the families, the type of space we've created is the initial draw. And then we invite our families to preferentially, we say, look, we love this program with OUSD. We think you're going to get the best partnership through them if that's what you want to do. If you want a school support system as well as what you're doing at Rock Tree Sky.
Even if just for sports and extracurriculars, and those things are very important.
Yes. So that's the relationship. And any young person who goes to Summit School, if they want to go to Rock Tree Sky, they can come for 2 days. That's paid for by the district for those 2 days at a very discounted rate compared to out of pocket. It's ultimately it's something I've had to consider with the business model. It's if a family's paying out of pocket versus what I work with the district, I give the district about $180,000 a year in scholarship for those kids.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to me. Remember, my mom was a public elementary school teacher. I'm sorry, an elementary school secretary for 20 years.
Wow.
So it's, supporting our local public schools is in my blood. And so that we have this really robust partnership, but it's more than just a business partnership, Brett. We really believe that the secret sauce, to borrow a phrase from my friend Marianne Ratcliffe, is in the idea that if those teachers can be on the same site as where Rock Tree Sky's enrichment opportunities are happening, there can be a really robust cross-pollination. They can see the curiosities and interests of the young people in our space, and then use that to surface learning and follow, what are the standards that they are still required by the state of California to teach, and they can bring those two things together. My turn. Yeah, they can bring those two things together, so you have this really powerful opportunity where the teachers can be on our campus and see the learning that's happening in a really intrinsically motivated way by the students, and then find ways to carry that into
incorporate some of those elements into their
absolutely
classrooms,
and that is the dream. We thought we could all be together on the Summit campus. It's turned out it's a little too small. So
well, that's a high quality problem, I feel like, because
I guess so.
The school was down to fewer than 40 at one time, from like 200 and some at one to fewer than 40, and they're desperately trying to keep it open and just couldn't. Now it's thriving.
It is thriving. It's a wonderful place to be. I love being there every day, and there's the imprint of the students, the young people on our space is everywhere. We've got this wonderful little small cob building. I wouldn't call it a building. It's more like a hobbit hut.
Yeah.
And that came out of a student's interest in it to learn how to grow culinary mushrooms. And
sell them at the farmer's market.
We've got.
Is that program still active?
It is. It's just starting back up now that the weather's cooling.
Yeah.
It's hard to grow mushrooms in Ojai in the summer.
Yeah.
We've got a garden bed outside that's in the shape of a dragon from the work of young people wanting to work with our new garden coordinator, Chad, and making this raised bed system that's, serpentine, yeah.
Nice.
So there's, it's everywhere. It's a joyful place to be, and it's a place that we co-create with the young people and the families. And, that, back to a pattern language, what a joy it is to build out a learning space in partnership.
And especially do it in a thoughtful and ground-up way, grassroots way. Yeah.
Yep.
So COVID, what did we, if we can just, I'll let you go here in a minute, but I'm just curious about what was your take on how it was handled, what lessons we've learned, what is it going to, what happened, and how do we, how do we incorporate them, and how do we avoid some of the pitfalls and decision making and how kids learn and everything else that went along with that, because it was so disruptive for so many people with kids. It was just
absolutely,
especially when you've got like 3 generations in one house, and the risks of being exposed. Get those kids back to school, but what about abuela and everybody else that's at risk?
Yep. Well, we learned a lot through COVID, and I was right in the thick of it through the whole thing. Rock Tree Sky shut down that spring, and then we opened back up the following fall. But outside, 95% of what we were doing was outside, moving in little pod groups. So the takeaways from COVID, from my observations, reading and paying attention to the kids in our community, are that some young people ended up thriving with the ability to use like Zoom calls or those types of interactions, or have more direct instruction outside of the pressures of an homogenous age group competitive classroom environment.
I can totally see that. Yes.
Some young people do not do well in many young people have challenges due to the fact that we put all the same age kids in the same room, and we create a competitive system. And if you're not one of the leaders in that competitive system, then you have an assessment about yourself that you take to heart, and it affects so many facets of your life, your self-esteem, your motivation, etc. Some kids actually found freed up from the pressures of that model. They thrived. They accelerated their learning. They learned faster. They were happier, etc. And some of those families have not gone back. In the state of New York, 1 in 20 kids have not gone back to public school.
5% have just
taken that opportunity and gone, and run with it. And now those parents are looking for other places to be.
A rock, tree, sky kind of place.
Things like that. You might hear the term micro school thrown out. There's a huge movement for these smaller school settings that
reminds
are
me of Paul
multi-age.
Goodman. Does that name ever come up? He was
not yet
back in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. Known for the greening of America kind of era. And his thing was, how do you build educational systems from the ground up? Like 6 or 7 families that pay one of them part-time to handle this particular thing.
Trying to take notes on that. Paul Goodman. Thanks, Brett. I'm going to write him down.
I think you'd be interested in his thinking. I
would be.
I don't know why it popped in my head, but I feel like that is, especially now when things have been so disruptive, it's never let a good crisis go to waste.
That's right. One of the other things from COVID, I would say, is that we learned that kids need to be together. There's that social interaction is so necessary.
Very important, yeah.
And then the other thing is that the young people are able to bounce back and learn things later and play catch up and be okay. And even if they don't, they're still okay. I can't tell you how frustrated I am to hear the term learning loss.
Oh yeah, that's big now. They're saying the kids lost like a full year.
How
are they ever going to catch up?
What did they gain? Right?
What was it that because they didn't pass or didn't get the test scores that they were hoping for?
Right. When you have a system that's the assessment is based on a really a simple kind of test that, again, cannot measure curiosity, cannot measure self-determination, motivation.
Resiliency.
All of those things. Does not measure any of that, but measures knowledge and skills. I don't think that's a robust measure. I'm sorry. I mean, the idea that our job is just to put knowledge into kids. Knowledge is cheap into kids' heads. Knowledge is cheap nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
It's
on your fingertips.
It's right at your fingertips. So it's ubiquitous. So how do we create how do we create what I'm interested in, the durable skills, right? How do we learn how to learn? These young people aren't going to go out to get a job and stay in that job for 30 years. They're probably going to go through 3 or 4 iterations or more of what they're going to be doing.
Entrepreneurial hustles.
You got to learn how to pivot, how to fail fast, how to do all that. And if you haven't had that opportunity and everything's been kind of knowledge-based, spoon-fed to you, and you sit there and be a passive receiver of your learning, then you're not preparing young people for the future that is arriving at the front door right now. So I think COVID opened our eyes that young people can be fine without school. They may not know what's going to be on that particular test, but there are other things they're going to know, and life moves on. And one last thing I think that I see out of COVID is that we need to build more resilient learning systems. When COVID happened and the school is shut down and everything's done, you miss out on this place where all the kids can go. But if the whole community had ways for young people to access the various assets, maybe going and working with people at the art center for this young person, going and working with the crew for this group of young people. If you had a more community ecosystemic mindset, you might find that we would be more resilient in the face of something like a COVID. So that would be my guess. That's what I'm interested in exploring.
And that brings us back to this new I don't even know what to call it.
Let's call it
ecosystem-based education.
Community-based ecosystems of learning.
Community-based ecosystems of learning.
There you go.
I'll put up some notes for people with some links to what you sent me.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Anything else you want to leave people with, or a message, or just to,
I would say if you were to throw out your idea of what a school is, and if you were to try and imagine, the best way to educate or to help a young person that thrive and have meaning and purpose in their life, how would you imagine creating opportunities for that young person to go about being successful and having a meaningful, purposeful experience of their life? That's something to think about. And
great thought experiments.
Yeah, and then maybe we can talk about it in the future. So I'm hoping that there will be some conversations with the community about how we could build something different in this special valley that we all love. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, Jim.
Absolutely.
All right, my friend. Hey, everyone. Brett Bradigan, just thinking out loud. So the conversation with Jim Bailey, we really covered a lot of ground. I think education is probably the most important community function that goes on. And we talked a bit about a pattern language. I think I'll put up a link in the notes so people can learn more about that. The idea that there's these timeless patterns that govern our life design, and how communities come together, right down to the most intimate living space, to the amphitheater. I think it's very much relevant to Ojai. Like we mentioned, the perfect community size, according to these many decades of research, study of these timeless patterns, is about 7,500 people. And I think that's because we can keep about 150 close acquaintances in our minds at any one time that we interact with on a daily or weekly basis. And then you scale that up to the people who have their own 150s. So pretty soon, 7,500 people, you're only 1 or 2 degrees away from everyone. And I think that's the secret to Ojai's magic. I urge you to dig further and to, check out the notes. I'll post some stuff up here about what Jim and I were talking about. Hope you enjoy it. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Ojai Talk of the Town. We'll keep an ear out for you.